I'm Tim Bolton, Head of Programmes here at Dartington, and on behalf of everyone at Schumacher College and Dartington, I would like to welcome you to this, our fourth online Joy of Six Schumacher College Earth Talk. And thank you all so much for supporting the work of Schumacher College. We've been holding Earth Talks for a number of years, face-to-face in the old postern and occasionally the Great Hall at Dartington. It's a fundamental part of our learning community, and we look forward to doing it again as soon as is practical. However, Schumacher College has a very long history of debate and research around our ecological and environmental catastrophe. And it feels important in this moment of global crisis that we reach out to our community, alumni, and those in search of a new normal. As in previous talks, the audience is joining us from across the globe, and I've already seen quite a number of chats coming in from Brazil and Utrecht and Brussels and Paris. And even the presenters are spread out across the UK. So although almost all of us are currently in lockdown, the world feels increasingly interconnected and all of us increasingly interdependent. This talk is the fourth in a series of 6, which take place every Wednesday evening, and which I hope you will also want to attend. And indeed, we're just finalising the next 6 talks. So first, a few words about the format for the evening. In a moment, I'll hand over to Jenny Mackewn to present her talk. We do want the session to be as accessible and interactive as possible, so please do use the chat button down at the bottom of the window, and also to share thoughts and ideas with your fellow audience members and us. And we'd also welcome questions throughout using the Q&A link, again at the bottom of the window. Jenny might respond to some of the questions as we go along, and will have a chance to put other questions to her during and at the end of the presentation. In total, we anticipate this session to last about an hour. It almost certainly won't be possible to ask all of the questions that you'll put, but I'll try and pull together common threads and themes, and I apologise if we don't get to ask your question. So let me start by introducing you to this evening's speaker, Jenny Mackewn. Jenny is a creative catalyst who convenes generative events and innovative learning programs. She's currently leading, co-creating the Emerging Future, a Schumacher College Certificate in Leadership, a focused training in constellations with systemic and embodied coaching and facilitator development adventure, a training in nature-connected facilitation. She's previously initiated and led a master's program in transformative leadership and organisational development for Middlesex University. She's developing a set of programs in holistic business development and leadership for the Earth. Jenny's focus is on training people as heart-centred leaders, intent on shaping a better world. Welcome back, Jenny, and over to you.
Thank you, Tim. That is absolutely fantastic. I'm very pleased to be here tonight.
Jenny, we don't seem to have your camera on yet. Good.
There. Am I showing now?
You are. That's great.
Tim and I will communicate with each other if we need to, and Tim will help me through only my second live webinar. So it's a bit of an adventure. And I thank you very much for coming this evening. It's fantastic. I'm not good at multitasking, so I can't read the chat box all the time, but I have had a look, and it's extremely exciting, as it always is when we have gatherings at Schumacher, to see people coming from all over the world. So welcome to an international community. Our topic tonight is co-creating the emerging future, 7 skills and 2 examples for leadership in a volatile and unpredictable world. And we will make it as interactive as we can. Of course, we'll find that there are some things we miss from the person-to-person meeting, but I've been experimenting with online work intensely for the last 6 weeks, and I've discovered that there are a few advantages as well. So let's enjoy the advantages and not miss the other things too much. This evening, we're going to be exploring what sort of leadership is needed during and after the coronavirus, tackling both the coronavirus and climate change. I'm Jenny Mackewn, as Tim has already explained, And he's also explained what I do, which is absolutely fantastic. Nobody ever does that, so I'm very delighted. And I would like to say how much I love my work. I'm passionate about it. And it's absolutely wonderful to be with you tonight. Let's have a super evening. So the themes that I'm going to cover tonight go like this. I'm going to start by introducing holistic learning, living and leading. I'm passionate about holistic learning, and you'll learn more in a moment when I introduce the 4 ways of knowing. Then I'm going to introduce you to the concept of a VUCA world, where VUCA means volatile and unpredictable, and so on. Then I'm going to offer us a framework of complexity in problems. Because one of the things that seems to go wrong when we take a lead or when others take a lead is there's often a mismatch between a complex problem and a relatively simple solution. Then we'll look briefly at traditional leadership, what it offered, and we'll consider what is actually needed as an alternative to traditional leadership, what's needed for a VUCA world. And in doing that, we'll look at some broad requirements for leadership in a VUCA world. And also we'll look at a model of leadership, which I call the wild goose leadership model, which is something that I've introduced over the last few years. And I'll finish by offering you some examples, because there are luckily examples of this sort of leadership already happening in the world. So I'm delighted to have you on board. Now I think if I'm lucky, I might get the first slide. And that's Tim's cue. No slide yet. Aha, there we are, it's come. So this is, no, we wanted that the first one about 4 ways of knowing, fantastic. So I said that I was passionate about holistic learning, living and leading. And this is one way of representing holistic learning. It's the idea that we can learn through different methods. And these are the 4 primary methods of knowing. Cognitive, which is when we learn with our head. Intuitive, which is when we learn through our hunches and our guesswork and our dreams. Emotional, which is when we learn with our heart and with our emotions and our feelings. And embodied, which is when we learn through our body. Often people find that quite strange to begin with, because we've usually been educated not to learn through our body. But once we get used to it again, we discover that in fact our bodies can pick up just as much as our heads and can be a very useful method of picking up data from the situations that we're in or from the group around us. We're going to give ourselves a little flavor of these different ways of knowing. The cognitive knowing you'll get bits of throughout the talk, and the embodied knowing we're going to experiment with right now, and then with the intuitive knowing as well. So with the embodied knowing, I've explained what it is, and our bodies are incredibly important. They're actually the source of our vitality, and traditionally they've been called the temple of our soul. So they're the source of your vitality for tonight. If I could have the next slide, Tim. Here. So here's my little experiment for you. Tuning into and sharing our body knowing right here and now. So what I invite you to do is to put your feet on the ground, feel your feet connecting with the floor, and then scan up from your feet, from toes to head. Scan up from your feet all the way up through your body and notice what your energy level is like. And when you've noticed it, then I want you to show yourself and other people where your energy is right now. So this little boy has brimful of energy, and he's showing us that he's completely energized and ready to go. So if you too are feeling completely energized and ready to go, please put up 10 fingers. And if you're feeling less than energized, put up whatever number you want from 1 to 10. So we're going to do it on the count of 3. When I say 3, please do it all together. 1, 2, 3. Fingers! Thank you very much. We may not have been able to see each other do that, but we could feel each other kinesthetically. And I feel like now there's a sort of wind of energy behind us, taking us on our way. So now I'm going to, next slide please, also give us a little experiment in connecting to and opening to our intuitive wisdom. And in doing that, we will also be experiencing a Schumacher tradition. What we're going to do is I'm going to ring a bell, and then we're going to have a minute of silence. And in that minute of silence, we ask you to center and to ground and to take a few deep breaths. And then to imagine that you're connecting with your intuitive wisdom. Then to imagine that your own intuitive wisdom is connecting through the floor, down through the building, to the body of the earth herself. And imagine that you're connecting with the profound wisdom of the earth. And thirdly, imagine that you're connecting to the collective wisdom of us all. Kinesthetically, we can do that. Our experiences of working online are that people can have very powerful embodied experiences and a real sense of the social field. So once I've rung the bell, I won't at that point give you further instructions. I'll run over them again now, but I want you to be able to have a minute, which is a minute of true peace. It might be the first one that you've had today. So I will ring the bell. We will take 3 long, slow breaths. We'll make sure we are connected to the ground by putting our feet on the ground. We'll feel where our souls connect with the floor. Then we'll imagine our energy connecting through the floor to the earth below. We'll imagine that we're connecting to the deep earth wisdom. Then we'll imagine that we're connecting to all the other people around the world who've joined us this evening, and thus connecting to collective intuitive wisdom. Then we'll have a moment or two of silence, and I will make a soft bell sound to bring you back to your everyday self. So here we go. I've had the feedback on the chat that the first bell was anything but a soft bell. So I think it was rather sharp. The second one I tried to make a bit softer. Next slide, please. So now we're launching into the talk proper. And I want first of all to talk about VUCA. We live in a world that is increasingly VUCA. And what do we need by that? We mean that the world in which we live is increasingly volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. Slide, please. Increasingly volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. Following slide. And perhaps the most important aspect of VUCA is the fact that the problems that we now face are extremely complex. So I'm going to bring in a framework which helps us assess the degree of complexity of problems that we face. It's a pretty straightforward framework. It gives us 4 levels of complexity of problem: simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And we'll learn a little bit more about each of those. Next slide, please. So simple problems are the domain of the known knowns, the domain of the familiar and the certain. So examples would be the route I take to get from one destination to another, or how to make a chocolate cake. You may not know how to do that at this very moment, but you can find the answer within 2 minutes by phoning a friend or by looking it up on the internet. So it's a simple problem. Next slide. The next degree of complexity are complicated problems. They're the domain of the known unknowns. They're characterized by order and predictability, and they can be known and solved by experts. Examples of these are the construction of a supertanker or a building, or the restructuring of an organization. Next slide, please. The next degree of complexity represents a really huge departure from the previous 2, because this is the domain of the unknown, of the unknown unknowns. It's characterized by flux and unpredictability, no right answers, and a conflict of different ideas and hypotheses about how to solve the complex problems. Most of these problems are quite global, but David Snowden, who's the author of this framework, he also must have, I think, himself been having teenagers at the time, because he puts as an example parenting teenagers or forecasting the global economy. You'll remember that in 2008, all the pundits got that wrong. They were predicting, nearly all the pundits, I should say, they were predicting continued boom. And in fact, we had a collapse of the economy. Other examples include the intense climate warming that we've been experiencing and the global epidemic. Final slide in this framework. So the next degree of complexity is chaotic problems. It's not just the domain of the unknowns, it's the domain of the unknowable unknowns. And they're characterized by high turbulence and no patterns. Examples are the events of the 11th of September 2001, climate warming, and a global pandemic. You may wonder why I've put climate warming and the global pandemic in both complex and chaotic problems. And the reason that I've done that is because I think they probably straddle between the 2. They're certainly in the realm of complex problems, but they may be verging into the realm of chaotic problems as well. Thank you. Next slide. So I want to say a little bit about traditional leadership and how there comes to be a mismatch often between the problems that we now face and the type of leadership that is often available. So our traditional leadership grew up out of the needs of our ancestors, of earlier peoples. So many leadership skills and attitudes arose from things like hunting and the hunt, things like the flight and fight responses, things like fighting tribes, and later military strategy and later still industrialization and mechanization. Next slide, please. So this traditional leadership that grew up out of those early needs was predicated on certain premises: that experts can solve problems, and that leaders know the answers, or that they should know the answers, and that leaders are in command and control. And you'll see our slide shows a leader who's very much in command and control. These assumptions about leadership, although they were formed in our early history, in our prehistory, they're still surprisingly prevalent today. Next slide, please. So, simple traditional leadership is very useful and very effective. It's useful and effective for simple problems and for complicated problems. But it is not useful for complex or chaotic problems. It's usually a mismatch. If we try to solve a complex problem with a simple solution, it usually represents a mismatch. I'm not understanding you. And it's often inadequate, almost always inadequate. So I'll give you a recent example. When some of us thought we were hearing a mismatch. That's next slide, please. That was the evening of Sunday, May the 10th, when our Prime Minister addressed the nation about his proposals for easing the lockdown. There were some clues that perhaps he was offering a simple solution to a very complex problem. Throughout, he beat the table in front of him with his fists. And some of us wondered whether perhaps unconsciously he was aspiring to command and control rather than co-creative collaboration. He also gave a tremendous amount of attention to one bit of scientific data, and that bit of scientific data was the R rate, which is the rate of reproduction of the infection. He gave relatively little attention to the complexity of other competing scientific data, and he gave very little attention to the complexity of the fact that other world leaders were advising different approaches to the easing because they were attending to different scientific data. Anyway, it's easy to carp, and I love the picture of the beating fists. What I'm going to switch my attention to now is an inquiry together with you about, so what would the leadership that suits a VUCA world, a volatile and unpredictable world, what would that leadership look like? Next slide, please. What alternative approaches to leadership are better suited to a VUCA world? And whenever I mention VUCA, we come up with this beautiful picture of birds flocking. They are British birds called starlings, and this is a particular formation that only those birds create. And they're behaving in a volatile and unpredictable and very complex way. We couldn't do it. We don't really know exactly how they do it. So they're a symbol of volatility, unpredictability, and complexity. Next slide, please. So here are some alternative approaches to leadership, which are particularly suited to this VUCA world. I'm just catching up with my cards. So leadership suited to a VUCA world needs to embrace collaboration and co-creation. It needs to embrace complexity in the unknown rather than try to avoid it. It needs to be based in complex systemic thought and practice. It needs to be continuously inquiring and asking itself the harder questions. And it needs to be suited to riding the turbulent rollercoaster of a VUCA world. And it needs to demonstrate skills designed for a VUCA world and for complex problems. I'll mention one of these base requirements, the one about riding the turbulent roller coaster of a VUCA world. And then I'll bring in the model of leadership, and then I'll end with a few examples for you. So may I have the next slide, please, Tim? So this is an example, an illustration of riding the turbulence of a VUCA world. Otto Scharmer and his colleagues at the Presencing Institute have developed something that they call the U process, and that I often refer to as a roller coaster. This is now a very, very well-known picture which represents the U process, and you'll see it's very much the shape of a roller coaster ride. And it represents how very challenging and turbulent this VUCA world can be. The Scharmer and his colleagues in the Presencing Institute have also given us a much more detailed map of this process. Next slide, please. And it shows 5 phases that we go through when we ride such a turbulent roller coaster. Perhaps for tonight, the most important one, and the one that I want to concentrate on with you, is the third one, which is called co-presencing. And at that stage, we're called on to be as present as we can in the present moment, as aware as we can, to connect with our deepest intuitive wisdom in the way that we did at the beginning of this talk. And in this very special state of presencing, we're called on to let go of whatever we need to let go of in order to let the future come. So that letting go might include past assumptions, past beliefs, even past identities. Because the future, the emergent future, is often prevented from coming as long as we stick with our past assumptions, our past beliefs, and our past identities. So this is not at all an easy stage for us human beings. It's difficult for us to be fully present, and it's very difficult for us to let go anything about ourselves, let alone such big things as the ones I've mentioned. Next slide, please. So I want to put it back to you for a moment again. Here's a symbolic letting go, the letting go of the leaf in autumn. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment to again recenter, put your attention to your feet, feel where they connect to the ground, and imagine yourself connecting to the earth. And ask yourself the question, what is it that I personally need to let go of? And what is it that we collectively, as a species, need to let go of in order to let the future come, to let the emerging future arrive? A future in which we can either learn to live with or to resolve the coronavirus, or we can learn to live with global warming or to resolve it. So what do we need to let go of in order to let an emergent and a generative future arrive? And I'm going to ask you to take that moment to reground, to recenter, and to connect to the earth, and then to put your answers in the chat box. They don't need to be long answers. They don't even need to be complete sentences, but we would really appreciate hearing from you. And we promise that whatever you say to us, we will weave into the next iteration of the leadership program. So 3 deep breaths again, and then to the chat box. Thank you. What do we need to let go of individually and collectively at this unprecedented historical time in order to let a generative future come? Well, I'm going to share back. I feel very excited. I can feel the energy coming in a pulsing orange glow as the chat box lights up again and again. Because Tim will be keeping a very close eye on time, I'm going to ask him to let me have the next slide, and I will go on talking, but I don't want you to stop sending in your answers. If you're better at multitasking than I am, please listen and please send in your answers. So here's my own contribution to this question about what sort of leadership do we need for the emerging future and a VUCA world and in the service of the earth. I call it the wild goose model of leadership. Why have I called it after the wild geese? Because they're the most wonderful symbol of co-creative and collaborative leadership. They don't form this unique and neat pattern of a V shape just for us. They don't form that V shape just to provide us with a photo opportunity at sunrise and at sunset. They form that unique V shape because it gives them the best chance of collaborating and cooperating and helping each other embark on their marathon journey and reach their destination all together. And they do that in the following way. The lead goose takes the lead, and when she takes the lead, she cuts through the air, and when she does that, she's doing a job for all the other geese. It's easier for them because she's taken the initiative and cut through the air. But she just doesn't just do that. In beating her wings up and down, she creates an almost miraculous aerodynamic flow in which the beating of her wings sets up an airflow that helps the goose behind her lift her wings, and so on, all the way back through the V shape. So the whole V of geese are helping each other and collaborating in meeting their goals. Next slide, please. So here's the wild goose leadership skills model, and it's an evolving model for taking a lead in the service of the emerging future, for serving the earth, and for meeting the needs of a VUCA world. You'll see that I've put in the middle the shape, as best as I could do it, of the U process and of the roller coaster, because I think that's absolutely central to any model of leadership. The capacity to ride turbulence and stay with complexity is absolutely essential. Next slide, which I think is going to show symbols of each of these leadership skills. I'm going to do your whistle-stop tour of this model of leadership. Then I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on 3 skills which are particularly relevant to a VUCA world. And then I'll move to our examples. So I think you need to press the next slide, Tim, and then I think, yeah, the symbol comes up. So this skill is being guided by purpose and creating passionate intent. This is totally relevant to the VUCA world, so I'll speak more about that when I come back to the 3 skills which are particularly suited for the VUCA world. Similarly, with immersing ourselves in lifelong learning. Attending to wider systems and serving the earth is the fact that we can no longer keep the narrow focus just on humans' egocentric needs, as somebody put in the chat box. We need to attend to the wider systems in which human beings exist. We need to attend to the web of life, and we need to attend to the earth herself and serve the earth. The narrow focus on which we've often had our eye, such as business and profitability, needs to be a thing of the past. We need to have these wider foci. We also need to make and prototype. We need to be constantly inquiring, and we need to implement with fierce resolve and deep humility. And we need to sustain our energy, our learning, and our commitment. And that's quite a tall order. If you're somebody trying to take a lead and you've got to try and do all these wonderful things and also sustain your energy, your commitment, and your learning. We have Satish Kumar, who founded Schumacher College, and he always contributes to the program that I lead in the most wonderful way. He comes and talks about how he has sustained his energy, learning, and commitment since he was 20 years old when he walked from India to the UK. And now he's in his 80s, still as vital and energetic and leaderly as he ever was. So his explanation of how to do it is obviously very valuable. My third slide, please, my next slide. Next slide, please. Hello? Tim, are you hearing me? Hello? Okay, well, I'll just
I am hearing you and pressing the button, but it's we seem to not be moving on. Ah, there we go.
Fantastic. So the symbols are coming up. Let's go through the symbols, and I do want the next slide. They seem to be taking their times, these symbols. There's always a hiccup. Here we are. Fantastic. Okay, so each of those is a symbol of these particular skills. And I love the tree at the end. The tree has to sustain its energy, learning, and commitment for hundreds of years, and we only have to sustain ours for 80 or so. So the next slide, in which I want to look at the skills which are really specialist for the VUCA world. And that is being guided by purpose, values, and service for the earth, as well as creating passionate intent. So why is being guided by purpose, values, and service for the earth so essential to a VUCA world? Well, that's because we've had decades and even centuries of attention to purpose and profit, profitability and short-term gain and exploitation of the earth. And it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. We now have a situation where global warming is threatening literally tens of thousands of other creatures on this earth, has already made many of them extinct, and is threatening the web of life and the earth herself. We can't go on with a concentration on profit as purpose. We have to have a bigger purpose, a purpose which is about saving the earth, serving the earth, putting the earth at the center of our human endeavors. The next skill of Wild Goose leadership, which is essential to a VUCA world, is immersing ourselves in learning. I've mentioned already that we live in a very volatile world. It's also a world which is speeding up and speeding up and speeding up. And when knowledge acquisition is getting faster and faster and faster. Some of you will have seen this. There's a little cartoon called The Story of Stuff, which tells us in only 5 minutes just how fast knowledge acquisition has become. So if we want to keep up with the world, even enough to understand the world, we have to commit ourselves to immersing ourselves in learning, and not just at school and at university, or even through a postgraduate degree. We have to commit ourselves to learning throughout our life. I do mean by that we'll be learning through books and through attending courses, but I also mean that we'll be learning through all our life experiences and all our experiences of work. And the third skill, which is absolutely essential to a VUCA world, is implementing with fierce resolve and deep humility. It's pretty obvious, really, that anybody who wants to take a lead needs fierce resolve. They need fierce resolve when they start off. They need fierce resolve when they gather the first people around them to join them in whatever it is they're trying to undertake. They need fierce resolve when they encourage people to form a core team. They need fierce resolve when they try to engage a wider audience. They need fierce resolve when they meet resistance. But why then do they also need deep humility? Isn't fierce resolve enough? Again, it depends on this volatility that we're now facing and this complexity. We need deep humility because the world is moving so fast that whenever we take a lead, we may make a decision, take action with good intention and discover in 1 month's time or 3 months' time or 1 year's time that we actually set off in a wrong direction and we need to revise and review and change direction. That's when we require the deep humility. It's because of the volatility and the complexity of the world. We need to have the humility to change direction and admit to the people who have joined us and who are following us that we need to do that. Next slide. So I said it's an evolving world. My invitation is I give you a pro forma model. You may not like the skills I put forward, but here's your opportunity to create your own model of leadership for a VUCA world and in the service of the earth. If you do it, please send it to me at my email address below. And next slide. Here I get to the fact that there are 2 examples I want to tell you about of this leadership already existing in the world. The first is the example of the city of Amsterdam and Kate Raworth and her model of donut economics. Kate is a tremendous enthusiast, and she's also a very keen contributor at Schumacher College, where she's much loved and appreciated. In 2012, she published a book called The Donut Economics, and it's a radical departure from previous models of economics, because it says that we do need to attend to profit and people, but it says that we equally need to attend to the well-being of the web of life and to the planet herself. And now, at last, a commercial city, a vibrant, well-known, much-loved commercial city, has embraced Kate's model and is putting it into practice. I know that you'll join me in wishing Amsterdam and Kate well, and also in watching this space. Perhaps we'll do another Earth Talk in 6 months' time and tell you what's happened with this form of leadership in a VUCA world. Next 2 slides. Another picture of Kate and Amsterdam. And here's the second example. It's New Zealand, and it's Jacinda Ardern. She also has made a radical departure recently, and she's making happiness rather than money the measure of her nation's success. I think there's one more slide. She's ditching GDP for happiness and well-being. And I love this picture. It shows Jacinda in a much more relaxed mood after she's made her announcement, getting selfies taken with some workmen who were in the vicinity. And it shows various normal, ordinary New Zealand people obviously delighted with the announcement. Final 2 slides, I think. So I invite you to finish by committing yourself to doing something that develops your leadership skills for a VUCA world. That will really make this talk take root in you. For example, you could practice making, you could take up an art or a craft, or you could sign up for my new course, Introduction to Complex Systemic Thought and Practice. The first 10 people to email me will get a free place on my new online course, Introduction to Complex Systemic Thought and Practice. I hope to hear from you very soon. Emailing me is even better than the chat box, but I don't mind which way you communicate with me. Final slide. So thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for sticking with it. Thank you for keeping your energy here. And good luck. Let's share what we all do in terms of taking a lead in the service of the earth and the service of the emerging future. When I say taking a lead, I mean each one of us. Satish Kumar says quite firmly, each one of us has the capacity to take a lead. It might be in something small and modest, it might be in something huge, but each one of us has an inner leader and an inner follower. So let's all join together to lead for the future. Now I think we might have some questions and comments and so on.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was great. And there are some questions coming through. It's quite clear from the chat that there's an awful lot of ideas out there. So it'd be great to see some more questions coming through. And it was just brilliant to see the kind of quality of chat.
Well, we would expect there to be lots of ideas out there, wouldn't we? Because we live in a VUCA world with complexity, which is the hallmark of which is to have competing ideas and hypotheses. So that's fantastic.
Can I maybe start off by asking you a question about that? I suppose it feels to me like we're living in a time when we have the kind of the rise of the strong man in government and so on being elected, largely on the basis, usually, of very simple answers to complex questions, which people seem happy to soak up. How can we encourage our fellow citizens to start searching out the complex questions and being interested in the more complex answers?
Well, Tim, I think that is the absolute key question. As I came to really study this, I thought that's one of the primary questions, because it seems, probably because of our history, that we are, most of us, very attracted to simplicity, to the simple life, to the idea of simple issues and seeking simple solutions. And we seem to have very little tolerance for complexity. I think we do have to develop tolerance and learn. I use the word embrace complexity and the unknown. And I mean that absolutely. We have to develop muscle for that, because almost all the really serious problems that we face are complex or chaotic ones. And as I said earlier in the talk, simple solutions are a complete mismatch. They don't work. They're inadequate.
Thank you, Jenny. Arthur Pays asks, are the terms leadership and collaboration compatible or contradictory?
Well, for me, they are compatible. I think they might involve some polarity and some paradox, but I think the complex leadership that we need to embrace for the future is one which absolutely is able to tolerate paradox and polarities. They must be compatible if we are to have a chance to move towards a better solution for climate change and for the coronavirus.
Eliza Christopherson asks, what do you think makes present time more complex than past times? That was very clear in your talk.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things is the volatility, that we now have knowledge acquisition happening 10s and 20 times faster than when you were a young woman, is one of the reasons that it's so much more complex. We are assaulted with knowledge all the time in different scenarios. So that creates an extraordinarily complex situation. And although the lockdown has been extremely difficult for many people, and I work with people in the Philippines, so I really know how difficult it's been. Many people have been for 8 weeks in one room. Other people have found that there's a greater simplicity during lockdown with very many less choices. And some people have found that an enormous relief, because the assault of knowledge is very exhausting to the human mind and very, very complicated and complex to deal with.
Thank you. Your two examples, Sophie Lovett asked the question, but your two examples, as Sophie Rayworth and Jitskinder, are both obviously women. And she says, do you believe that women have something particular to offer in facing these complex times? It strikes me that many of the problems we face are as a result of the patriarchy.
Yes, well, you'll see that I try to avoid too stark political comments. I think that women do have something to offer. I didn't choose those two initially just because they were women, but of course it didn't escape my attention that they were women. Kate is actually working, of course, with men in the city of Amsterdam. She and they have formed a coalition in order to bring the donut economics to reality. So we're not in any way saying that these movements will happen without men. That would be non-collaborative and very unsuccessful. But there has been research, which I can't actually tell you what it is, but we'll put it up on the website with the talk. There has been research that indicates that women as leaders tend to be more highly collaborative than men. So that bit of research I know exists. I'm sorry I can't get it to you at my fingertips, but I will be able to put it on the website. And I would actually be very interested to study that a little bit more. So it's not, I think, that women are necessarily better leaders, but they seem to be better at collaboration, which is something that we need for a VUCA world and for the service of the earth.
Thank you. In our current audit-dominated business culture, management seems to only be interested in certainty, and we seem to have become increasingly risk-averse and unprepared to deal with ambiguity, which seems to be where the magic is and where certainly the sort of the basis of all great entrepreneurship and so on. How are you able to kind of counter this?
Oh, I think you've nearly outfoxed me there. Up to now, I felt able to answer the questions. I think I'll have to think about that. And Tim, you might be able to help.
I'm wondering about how a VUCA helps in terms of that, because it does feel that I can't remember exactly the quote, but a bookseller who was asked about how on earth did he manage to pick the best sellers. And he pointed to the back room and to the thousands of boxes of books that hadn't ever sold.
Yes.
And you have to cast around, don't you? And some things are successful and some things aren't, but you have to trust that they'll.
And actually, you are right that in many businesses, all they're interested in is the quarterly figures, and I absolutely understand what this questioner is saying. But in Theory U, we do have a real embracing of the need for what you've just said, Tim, the need to fail. They even say, let's fail fast in order to learn. And they talk about prototyping rather than polishing and perfecting. And I have really learned from that myself. I had a little bit of a perfectionist streak. Now I prototype as quickly as I can, and I learn enormously from doing so. So not all of business is dedicated to certainty. Otto Scharmer is an extremely successful businessman who also has a very popular place amongst global businesses. So I think there's hope in his teachings that businesses might be able to embrace some of the ambiguity that our questioner finds exciting, and rightly so. My own example is on March the 12th, all my work was cancelled, first time in my whole professional career, and that happened to many of us. And I spent about 5 days in the doldrums thinking, well, that's that. And then I woke up one morning and I thought, okay, I'll learn the skills. And I had the most wonderful 4 weeks of immersive learning. I went to every webinar and training program there was, not just about how to put things online, but how to make them experiential, engaging, and juicy. I had a lovely time, and last week I ran my first 5-day online training program, and the feedback that I liked the best was they said this has been the most fun of any online program we've been to. They also got what they wanted to learn, but we enjoyed ourselves as well. So, there are difficult circumstances are terrible, and there are sometimes little glimpses of light in them as well.
That's great. I think how we humanize online presence is a really big issue for us at the moment, isn't it? But Chris Robinson asks, doesn't the theory, the sort of U version of leadership, imply a single journey rather than a circular or a spiral?
Do you know, I was looking for that slide and I couldn't find it. I actually think it's one of the things they do. And you can see I'm quite a fan of Theory U, and I'm thoroughly trained in social presencing theatre, which is the movement discipline that goes with Theory U. But I haven't seen them really deal with this, so I'm going to draw it with my hands. I think it looks as if it deals with a one-off view process. Whereas my slide that I couldn't find shows a series of roller coaster rides, more like waves. And I think that's much more like what living is and what learning is and what leading is. We embark on one roller coaster ride and it turns into the next and into the next. And waves is a very, very good symbol of it, really.
No, that's good. Thank you. What are the good ways? This is from Sarah Annabelle. What are the good ways to stimulate and encourage complex leadership from the bottom?
Well, that was the one that outfoxed me before, if you remember. I think it's our biggest question. So I thank you very much for the question. I think we have to develop the idea that we have to develop muscle in order to tolerate complexity and stay with it and come through it to a place where we can find collaborative decision and action. I think it really does need to be taught, and people need to be invited to develop that muscle. And at the moment, I don't see that being taught in schools or even universities. And so we're still seduced by the simple solution. Not everybody, of course. Most people who've come to the talk tonight, let me drink to you, are devoted to complexity and volatility. And I thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Gunther Weimer asks, so seeing that the world is very much probably going back to a new normal, we can hope, can't we, rather than I keep worrying as more cars pour out onto the road that we're just going back to the same normal. But how do we navigate that fake certainty? I suppose of the idea of a new normal.
I think we have to profoundly consider the question that we asked in the middle of this talk. What do we need to let go of in terms of our own assumptions, our own beliefs, and our own identities in order to let a generative future emerge? And again, it's a very difficult question for human beings, but people have been looking at that over the last 8 weeks. Perhaps we can.
Thank you. And this might be our last question, but can I ask, this is from Katie Driver, how can we make it easy and attractive for existing leaders to change their ways, including how do we speak, or at least initially, in their language to build rapport and avoiding blame, etc., which prompts defensiveness and doesn't create the mindset and openness for learning and change? I think that's a really good point, because our current leaders are likely to probably carry on being our leaders, but we change their mindset in some way.
Completely, and you hinted at this earlier, and so did one of our questioners. It isn't the leader's fault alone. It's our fault too. We're the voters, and we vote very often for simple solutions and are seduced by simple solutions, and we don't insist that our leaders stay with the complexity of the situation and work to find out complex responses. In fact, we're the opposite of insisting on that. So we ourselves, as followers and as leaders, have to develop this muscle, the complexity muscle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny. I think we probably have to leave it there in terms of questions. That's just about brings us to the hour.
And can we save the chat? It's so interesting.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We are saving the chat, but we haven't yet worked out how we can share the chat with everybody when we share the recordings. We will discuss that further tomorrow and see how we can do it.
And I think you will eventually put up the slides and the recording on the website. Is that right?
It should go live this time next week. With a bit of luck.
We've just got a few days to polish it up and make sure the right reference in there. I can't thank you enough, Tim. You've been a fantastic companion. And I can't thank the people who attended enough. Your responses are so vibrant and vital. It's been really enjoyable. Yeah. And I got into my stride. I'm sorry it took me a few minutes at the beginning. I'm not quite used to this medium yet, but I'll get there. Thanks to your encouragement.
It's great, Jenny. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope that all of us are going to suddenly embrace the new digital world and spend 5 weeks working out how we can work with it in the way you have. We've got a further 2 talks in this series, which I hope you'll also want to attend. And we're already working on the next series. So please look out for that. And I hope Jenny's talk has whetted your appetite, in which case I would point you towards the Schumacher College website, where there are a number of short courses that Jenny's leading on or contributing to over the next 12 months. And she's also pointed you to some other opportunities as well. This has been our 4th online Earth Talk, so we would love to have your feedback on how we can continue to improve, and also we'd love to hear about the issues, topics, speakers you would like to see in the future. So can I thank you all again for your very active participation? As Jenny says, the chat is really exciting and dynamic. And can I thank once again Jenny Mackewn for a really interesting, insightful talk. So thank you all so much, and good night.
Thank you, Tim. And Jane.